And good morning, evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome along. It's Kathy Frey here with this week's Maternity Natural Health webinar, hosted by IMCO, the International Integrated Maternity Healthcare Organisation. And this week, really pleased to be having along Raia Kousary. Raia, say hello.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Good morning.
It is really good to have Raia back. We had her here probably about a year ago, and Raia's specialty is homeopathy. And homeopathy is a really interesting topic, so she's going to be going through a lot of that with you. But one of the things with homeopathy is that it's just so user-friendly for anything to do with, practically anything to do with maternity and babies. I want to tell a story about homeopathy because I think it's always right good to sort of give anecdotal evidence, anecdotal commentary and things. But just a little bit of background firstly on Raia. So she is a homeopathic practitioner, obviously, and she's founder of the Hormone Clinic. That she also holds an advanced diploma in homeopathic medicine from the Sydney College of Homeopathic Medicine, and she discovered homeopathy through her own health complaint, which she might go into, which resolved through homeopathy. Eventually deciding to retrain from her background in psychology and education to homeopathic practice. And so often, probably 98% of the time, our speakers here have had some kind of story like that inspires you into that area of specialty, and it becomes that personal passion. So Raia's been in practice for about a dozen years now, and has ended up focusing particularly on infertility and hormonal health issues, thus the Hormone Clinic as her practice name. So she's going to be talking today about morning sickness, but obviously a whole lot of other bits and pieces as well. But as I say, I want to tell you a little story because homeopathy was something that myself, when I was newly pregnant with our first baby, and at that point I was not a health practitioner in any capacity, and I hadn't written any books or anything. I was just a complete newbie to this whole thing. And you realize quite quickly, I think, as a woman, when you become pregnant that first time, that you kind of go, oh my God, I'm this sacred vessel, and I can't put anything wrong in, and all the terrible way I've been treating my body, and all the partying and everything else, and you suddenly kind of go through this desire to be pure and clean, and I started to learn about homeopathy as a way to help with your health and wellness. And by the time our first child was 6 months old, I'd been using it a lot. And in fact, I had this little Bible, which oh my God, I just lived with this little Bible, and all these containers of all these boxes of all these inexpensive and incredibly effective homeopathic tinctures. So we've got a first baby. As I say, I'm not a health professional at this stage, and she's 6 months old, and we're away on holiday, and this little munchkin is just coughing and not very happy, and yet clearly there's an infection going on, but I didn't know how to check anything. So I went off to the doctor. We were down the country in a place called Taupo, went to some doctor there, and they said, oh, yes, your child's got bronchiolitis. I went, okay. And they said, here's antibiotics. And I went home and went, yeah, I'm not going to try that straight away. So I looked up my little book, and I found the correct tincture and gave it to her over the course of the rest of that day. And next day she woke up and there was no bronchiolitis. So, but this little one was refusing food, and it was, and I thought, God, it's almost like you've got a sore throat. You're not coughing. So again, I thought, by now we're in another town called Tauranga, or city called Tauranga. We're slowly coming back up the country, and I thought, oh, you know, terrible mother, you haven't fixed her. I'll go to the doctor again, but it's clearly not this cough. And the doctor goes, oh, your child's got tonsillitis. I'm like, oh, okay, well, yesterday this little one had bronchiolitis. And the doctor's like, there's no way your child had bronchiolitis yesterday, dear. No, your child has tonsillitis. and yeah, it gave me this antibiotics, and I went home or went back to our accommodation and went, yeah, looked up my book. We're not having antibiotics. Looked up tonsillitis, gave tonsillitis remedies, and for the rest of that day. The next day, we were moving on. We were coming back up to Auckland, and this little munchkin is pulling its ears. Oh, eating again, not coughing, but pulling its ears. Oh no, what is it this time? So off to the doctor I went again for a diagnosis, and the doctor goes, you've got otitis media. This child's got an ear infection. I went, okay, well, yesterday, the little one had tonsillitis, and the day before had bronchiolitis, and the doctor, of course, looks at me like I'm insane and said, no, there's no way that could possibly be true. Went home with another prescription of antibiotics, which we didn't take. I'm not anti-antibiotics, I'm just anti them being the first cab off the rank. Looked up the remedies for ear infection, and we had a cured child the next day. So then I touched base with our local classical homeopath and said, what the heck was that? Bronchiolitis, then tonsillitis, then an ear infection. Like, what did I do wrong? And the homeopath was, no, you did everything right, because the infection was moving up the body. It was ridding. I was like, oh my God. So, and it was at that moment in time that my husband, who'd always been a little bit a little scoffy around homeopathy, that was it. We were complete and utter 1000% converts, because we'd seen it. We'd seen these crazy miraculous cures. So we went on to raise 3 children with homeopathy as our first cab off the rank for practically everything, and a bit of naturopathy on the side as well, things like hypercal, which is well, that's really basically homeopathy as well. And by the time our kids were our eldest had first antibiotics at age 18, and that was because of a dog bite in a supermarket car park. And that was actually me insisting, I'm going far out, I'm not messing with a dog's mouth, I think you should have some antibiotics on this one. And our middle one didn't have antibiotics ever in her life until age 23, and our youngest one, who's 21, has not yet had antibiotics. And all of that I put on. It's not to say that those kids haven't been sick, but their immune systems are incredibly strong. And I put that down to the fact that they got so much use in their childhood. Their sister, you'd give them homeopathic drops to assist their body to heal itself, and its body would heal itself. And they have resulted in these amazing immune systems that are so full of antibodies of all these different things I've experienced. So I don't want to take over today, but I wanted to share that with you all, because it was a phenomenal experience that really went on to carve a huge path of the rest of my life on looking at holistic healthcare, naturopathy, and all of its types. And so I want to hand over now to Raia. And
brilliant, Kathy, thank you.
And let her focus down on these topics to do with maternity today, And so we're going to hand over. She's going to open up a PowerPoint. And
Yep.
obviously, if anybody, if you're watching today, have any questions that you want to put in, do feel free to put those into the live Q&A. So Raia, please. Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
Take over the screen and reintroduce yourself as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that warm and wonderful introduction, Kathy. It's really, really great to have champions of homeopathy because, of course, as you mentioned, it is fairly misunderstood by a lot of people, even not known about or misunderstood. And it really, really is good to, have champions out there such as yourself and positions like this that are advocating for the use of homeopathy. And as you say, we're lucky to live in the time of antibiotics, but they shouldn't be the first port of call in most circumstances when, ear infections and tonsillitis and things can be taken care of with the most appropriate homeopathic remedy, as you say. And it's wonderful that your kids have benefited from that over the years, and your whole family. So thanks again for having me back, coming at you from Queensland, where it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. So today we'll have a look at the homeopathic treatment of morning sickness. Later, but before we get into the homeopathy, we'll take a look at some self-care and home remedies and supplements and things. So as you all know, it's morning, they call it morning sickness, but it obviously, it's not just in the morning for some women, but it's a normal change in pregnancy. It's a normal pregnancy symptom, normally kicking in around 6 weeks to 13, 14 weeks for most women, and for some women going up to 20 weeks and beyond. As we've said, why is it called morning sickness if it lasts all day? For some women, it's on and off all day. For other women, it's constant. And this is not very funny. If you got up an hour earlier, you could get over it in time and get back to work. Not necessarily. And for some women, morning sickness, as you know, you'll be experts being midwives in morning sickness. But 70 to 80% of all pregnant women experience some form of morning sickness. But hyperemesis gravidarum is the extreme end of morning sickness, and can be life-threatening. It's a serious condition where you're normally hospitalized, dehydration, lack of weight, nausea, vomiting that's constant throughout the pregnancy. Now, we think that morning sickness or nausea during pregnancy comes about through the HCG hormone, which is released it peaks at around about 6 weeks. And therefore, that's why, there's a correlation between when morning sickness kicks in for most women and the peak of that hormone. But we're not exactly sure why some women have hyperemesis gravidarum. But things to look out for is vomiting for more than 24 hours, severe dehydration with, dark urine and a dry mouth, abdominal pain, intense headache and stiff neck, or blood in the vomit. Then you probably want to seek medical attention if you're having a presentation of morning sickness like that. So for a lot of women, as you know, you may have experienced nausea during pregnancy yourself. Even the smell and the sight of food can trigger a bout of nausea, and you can be quite put off eating and not wanting to be anywhere near food or smelling food. But one of the self-care measures that you can, take on board is eating regular protein and having small, frequent meals throughout the day. So rather than having 3 big meals, break it up and have 5 or 6 smaller meals. Some women even find that having a sandwich or some nuts in their handbag and even setting an alarm on their phone and having just 1 or 2 mouthfuls of food every hour just settles down the nausea. Just keeping their blood sugar levels constant is important for that. Obviously, everybody knows dry toast in bed before you get out of bed in the morning, and staying away from like greasy, fried, saturated food. Even looking at it is making me feel nauseous right now. And chilies and spicy food, just going for more bland food. Keeping hydrated is obviously very important, especially if you're vomiting, but women would struggle probably. Drinking a whole glass of water is probably going to induce nausea. So having sort of small, frequent sips throughout the day, just keeping on top of your hydration. One thing you can do for that too is maybe licking your finger, putting it in some Celtic or Himalayan salt and dabbing it on your tongue, and drinking a glass of water over the Himalayan or Celtic salt twice a day. It just allows the absorption of the water a bit more effectively into your cells and hydrates you a bit better. Probably avoiding or reducing tea and coffee anyway, but staying away from them completely, from caffeine, can also help some women. And just getting rest and sometimes fresh air, sort of connecting with nature, being outside, can help with some, mild nausea. Now, ginger is known in many different cultures as being an anti-nausea substance. So it works quite well for some people. So just making 4 cups of ginger tea during the day with half a teaspoon of grated ginger in some warm water, or just somehow getting a teaspoon of grated ginger into your diet in a salad or in some way, or even 2 or 3 Budrum sugar-free ginger cubes can be useful. Many women that have serious sort of morning sickness during pregnancy are low in B6, and it's good to supplement with B6 and see if that assists. So 10 to 25 milligrams of B6 3 times a day. I would suggest sort of starting with 10 milligrams 3 times a day and working your way up as needed. That can be helpful. So here we have a study comparing the effectiveness of B6 and ginger in the treatment of pregnancy-induced nausea and vomiting, which is probably a better description than morning sickness. So they had quite a high dose of B6, 40 mg twice a day, and then 250 mg 4 times daily of the ginger. And basically both led to a significant reduction in the nausea. The B6 won out over the ginger slightly, but it wasn't statistically significant. So luckily we don't have to choose. You can of course do the ginger and the B6 as well. But interesting that they were both found to be fairly effective in this study. Women are not only low in B6 generally when they have a lot of nausea, but magnesium, and our need for magnesium increases during pregnancy, as you know. So here we have a lot of foods that are high in magnesium: nuts, seeds, bananas, avocados, even a bit of chocolate there creeping in at the bottom. But you probably want to supplement with magnesium. Your requirements for it go up during pregnancy, as with most things. So probably about 350 to 360 mg of magnesium daily. And that in combination with, B6 and ginger, that might be enough to settle the nausea down. Another thing that some women find effective is lemon. So you could make lemon and ginger tea. You can put a squeeze of lemon in some water that you're sipping on throughout the day. You can diffuse lemon in an aromatherapy dispenser. It can sort of cleanse the palate and make things more palatable and just refresh things. And peppermint tea also has anti-nausea properties. So too much would cause heartburn maybe in some people. So just a moderate amount of peppermint tea if you prefer that. And acupressure. This is called a C-band, and it's a wristband that's designed to push on the acupressure point that relieves nausea. So, you can purchase it online. The other way to do it is to I should remove my watch, but take your top 3 fingers and put them just where your wrist is, the bottom of the palm of your hand, your 3 fingers. And then at the bottom of where those fingers are, take your thumb, and pushing in there, you can feel two ridges or bands, kind of tissue running along there. Just push in there and then rotate clockwise or anti-clockwise and keep pushing on there. And that's an anti-nausea sort of acupressure point. So 3 fingers below the palm there and pushing in there, or get the wristband. Some people find it quite effective. Other people find it uncomfortable to wear. You don't know until you try. Essential oils for nausea. There are probably many others, but lemon and lime, as we've already sort of looked at, lemon, ginger, cardamom, and peppermint. You can just diffuse them in a diffuser is probably the easiest way to take that during pregnancy, to sort of interact with it. But now to homeopathy, the main event. So just briefly, in 2006, the World Health Organization reported that there were 550 million users of homeopathy worldwide and 220 million users of homeopathy in Europe and India combined. So it's quite well utilized form of medicine in many parts of the world, but not really well known in Australia or New Zealand. Probably slightly more in New Zealand. But anyway, the founder of homeopathy, how it was sort of developed was back 200 years ago. Cinchona officinalis was the best treatment for malaria that was available. And the founder of homeopathy, who was a German doctor, got hold of cinchona and took several doses of it. And he developed the symptoms of malaria. Then he stopped, he repeated it, he developed the symptoms of malaria again. He gave it to his family members. The same thing happened. And he surmised that the reason that cinchona assisted with malaria was because it causes the symptoms of malaria. So hence the word homeopathy, as in similars, homo, similar, meaning that a substance that causes something in somebody who's healthy can treat it in somebody when they're unwell. So just to say a double espresso coffee is going to make a young child anxious and restless and agitated, in somebody who's experiencing anxiety and restlessness and agitation, a homeopathic medicine made out of coffee can calm the system down. So it's sort of, as Kathy said, going with the body rather than opposing it. In conventional medicine, everything is antibiotic, antidepressant. It's opposing what's happening. Whereas with homeopathy, we're kind of going with what's happening and reestablishing an equilibrium in the body. So in terms of case taking with homeopathy and with nausea and pregnancy, we're looking at things that are useful to know is the woman worse in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening? Is she worse before or after eating? Does eating relieve her symptoms or make her worse? Is there any loss of appetite at all? Does vomiting relieve the symptoms? And what is her emotional state? Has there been an increase in irritability? Is she weepy and needing comfort, or indifferent, just doesn't care about anything and wants to be left alone? Are the symptoms worse or better when she's lying down? Does the smell of food make her better or make the nausea worse or not? Is the vomiting accompanied by saliva or not? Is she more thirsty or thirstless? And are there concomitant symptoms such as constipation and headaches, other symptoms that are going along with the nausea? These are all helpful for us for identifying the appropriate homeopathic medicine. So I thought we'd just look at a few cases. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this case and then look at some remedies. And then out of the next 5 or 6 remedies, I'd like you to try and identify which one, have a think about which one would be most effective. So there's a 27-year-old woman in her first trimester who's been experiencing constant nausea and vomiting throughout the day. The nausea is so bad that she spends most of the day lying in bed or on the couch, totally still. She finds that any kind of movement increases the feeling of nausea, and she feels better lying on her back. The nausea can be so bad that it persists even when she hasn't eaten anything. Both the smell of the food and the thought of eating aggravates her nausea, and she can even retch on an empty stomach if she hasn't eaten. So thinking about those symptoms, we'll go ahead and have a look at a few remedies. So colchicum is a heavy hitter with morning sickness. The remedies that have 3 stars are sort of ones that would be prescribed more often for this condition, and 2 stars less so, but that doesn't rule out the other remedies. The most important thing is the match between the symptoms and the person's condition. So with this remedy that's made from these beautiful flowers, the woman would be worse from the smell of food, especially cooked food. She's unable to even think about food. It brings on nausea. She's very sensitive to odors and has a heightened sense of smell. Is worse from motion, so her nausea feels worse when she's moving around. And she may crave various foods, but then she can't tolerate them. And with amygdalalis persica, there's no type of food is tolerated, and there's constant nausea and vomiting that lasts all day, and there's a loss of smell and the taste of food. So when she eats, she doesn't really, doesn't taste the food. And Jesophagium herbaceum, this looks very much like, I'm living in the Lockyer Valley, and it's a rural area outside of Brisbane, and we have some cotton fields at the moment that are just coming to the end. And it looks very much like this plant here, the cotton growing on a bush. But this one is actually from sub-Saharan Africa or Arabia. But anyhow, morning sickness with sensitive uterine region. So she'll have intermittent pain in her ovaries. She might be worse before breakfast, have a loss of appetite, and have morning sickness from the least motion, even raising her head from the pillow. She'll have a backache with a sensation of weight and dragging in the pelvis, which is also seen in another homeopathic remedy there, sepia. Graphites or carbon, there's nausea and vomiting after each meal, burning in the stomach, which can cause hunger, constrictive pain in the stomach, and she feels worse after she has hot drinks. And there's 5,000 homeopathic remedies, and it's not easy to pronounce all the names sometimes. Symphophoricarpus aromosus. So in this woman, the nausea is worse during any motion, and she has an aversion to all food. She cannot stand the thought or the smell of food. She can retch and heave on an empty stomach. She's better lying on her back, and she possibly has had constipation during the pregnancy. In jacaranda, in Australia, we have the beautiful jacaranda tree that comes out later in the year. And this woman would have nausea when she eats. She has a pressure or fullness at the pit of her stomach, and she has hurried breathing. So when you see these symptoms, this might be a good remedy for her. So back to our morning sickness case, the first one. So she has constant nausea and vomiting throughout the day. Any kind of movement increases the feeling of nausea. She feels better lying on her back. The smell of food aggravates her condition, and she can retch on an empty stomach. So which remedy out of the ones we looked at do you think would be the best match? What I prescribed was Symphophoricarpus aromosus, because she has the retching and heaving on an empty stomach. She's better lying on her back. The nausea is worse from motion, and she couldn't stand the thought of smell or food. So that seemed to be the best match and worked quite effectively. So moving on, case 2, 23-year-old woman who had been treating for anxiety. She was experiencing a lot of very intense nausea. The nausea came on in the morning, but tends to improve after breakfast and throughout the day. She also reported feeling much more tired than usual, which is a common symptom from pregnancy, but she'd fainted the previous week, and she sometimes feels short of breath with the nausea. Let's go on and have a look at a few more remedies, and in the next section of remedies, there'll be one that's the best match for this case. So Kali Mur, You might know it as a tissue salt. It's good for morning sickness where there's vomiting of white phlegm, and fatty or rich food causes indigestion. And the coating of the tongue can be grayish and white or dry and slimy. So there's a change in the coating of the tongue. And then cocculus is another heavy hitter. This remedy is actually very good for car sickness as well, motion sickness, when you go on a boat, if you suffer from motion sickness on a boat. And interestingly enough, women are more prone to getting morning sickness or nausea during pregnancy when they have a history of motion sickness, or also if they have multiple pregnancies like twins or triplets. I imagine that that's from the higher level of hormones it's released. But cocculus is a big remedy, and it's worse from the motion of a car or boat or looking at an object in motion. They're adverse to food and drink, food more, and worse from eating. So they feel worse after they eat. They might have a metallic taste in their mouth. The smell of food disgusts her, and there's a loss of appetite. They desire cold drinks, and they might be worse in the afternoon. And lacticum acidum, which is actually lactic acid. This woman might be pale and anemic. She's better after eating, especially after breakfast. And she might have copious salivation, which other remedies have as well. She's got hot, burning, belching with profuse secretion of mucus, and she's aggravated by smoke. And lobelia inflata, there's extreme nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. And there's morning sickness with impeded respiration. It's hard to breathe. And she can faint, and she has a good appetite generally. That's a pretty flower. And Merc Sol, so mercury. I should explain that homeopathic medicines are very, very, very dilute. So there's, extremely dilute. So don't be concerned that you're giving somebody mercury, that a homeopath's giving somebody mercury. Morning sickness with profuse salivation, and there's an intense thirst for cold drinks. Discharges tend to be offensive, like sweat and, bowel motions, and everything aggravates them. They're quite irritable and, annoyed by everything. So Nat Foss is morning sickness with sour vomiting, blisters on the tip of the tongue. There's a thin, moist coating on the tongue, a yellow, creamy coating on the back part of the mouth, flatulence, gas, headaches. So back to our case, she had very intense nausea. It comes on in the morning, but it tends to improve after breakfast and throughout the day. She has fainted, and she feels short of breath with the nausea sometimes. So going back, if you have a think about the remedies that we've had a look at, we went with lobelia inflata, which worked very well because she has fainted, she has extreme nausea and vomiting, and she has it's affecting her breathing. How much time have I got, Kathy? I've got another 2 cases. Should I continue or?
Yeah, you're doing absolutely fine. Another, 10 or 15 minutes, even if you wanted, or 5, it's all good.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So morning sickness case 3, we've got a 30-year-old woman who's been experiencing nausea and intense, even painful vomiting that's been going on since the 2nd month of her pregnancy. The nausea is worse in the morning and after eating. She also reports that she's been much chillier and more irritable since getting pregnant. Her husband's been complaining about it. She feels better by just lying down under some warm blankets or having a warm bath or shower. And since she's been pregnant, she's been having terrible constipation and started taking over-the-counter laxatives. So that's what we're looking for in the next few remedies that come up. So sepia officinalis is a big, heavy hitter female hormonal remedy. And isn't it beautiful, like the fish that The remedy is actually made out of the ink of the cuttlefish, and this is a cuttlefish. So there's nausea in the morning before eating, or it could be in the evening until sleep. Nausea at the sight and smell of food, like colchicum. But particularly with sepia is nausea and smell at the sight of food that before pregnancy she really enjoyed. So say before pregnancy she loved, I don't know, pizza, couldn't get enough of it, and then now the sight or the smell of it just makes her particularly nauseous. Nausea is better by eating, by motion and exercise. There's can be a bearing down sensation in the pelvis. She's sensitive to odors and smoke. She might desire vinegar and sour foods, and is possibly indifferent or depressed, wanting to sort of be left alone and possibly a bit irritable. That's sepia. Pulsatilla is another huge female hormonal remedy, often indicated in morning sickness. So nausea is worse in the late afternoon and evening. That's a key feature here, and worse after eating. Often feels better in the open air actually too, and could be weepy, needing assurance. She can crave for, she doesn't know what, like I need, she's craving for something, but I don't know what it is. She'll be presented with what she asks for, then she doesn't want it, and then she's, wanting something else, and then she doesn't really want it. Quite changeable state. Aversion to fat, she might crave it. So she might crave the fat, but then she's adverse to eating it. So there can be belching where the taste of food stays long in the mouth. So she have some food and then belch, and then you've got the taste of that food for quite a long time in the mouth. Nux vomica is another heavy hitter with morning sickness. So it's morning nausea and after eating. The stomach can be very sensitive to pressure with spasmodic cramping and retching, bloating and difficult belching of gas, painful vomiting, but after she vomits, she feels better, for a time. Sour tasting vomit, perhaps, nausea with the desire to move the bowels, constipation, irritable and easily offended, and possibly waking up around 3 a.m. in the morning, because it's a big liver remedy, and that's kind of a time when people wake up when they've got issues with their liver. Tobacco, which is made out of, the substance that we use in cigarettes, tobacco. So incessant waves of nausea with a faint sinking feeling in the pit of the stomach. Vomiting on the least motion, vomiting with cold perspiration, or becoming very pale and cold after vomiting. Feels better with the stomach uncovered and fresh air, lying quietly. Funnily enough, they're worse by the smell of tobacco smoke, and they may feel sick all day without vomiting. And Arsenicum album, arsenic, extremely mentally restless with the morning sickness. She gets anxious and restless, and it's hard for her to stay still. There can be nausea and retching and vomiting after eating. The vomiting can cause her to faint once again. She's got heartburn and burning pains, and thirsty, but drinks just a little bit each time and feels chilly. So theridium, this is an interesting remedy made out of the spider. And I've actually prescribed this recently for somebody whose state has changed since COVID. And basically ever since COVID vaccination or having COVID, they are very sensitive to noise. They were very sensitive to noise. Even somebody putting, their husband putting a coffee cup on the coffee table would set them off. Every single little noise was extremely aggravating to them. And this is morning sickness with sensitivity to noise. Even the slightest noise tends to be chilly, and they tend to be restless. Anyway, she's improved massively, but just really interesting how, the strange and wonderful things that, say, a doctor might not know what's going on with a person, why she would be like that, can't diagnose it. Just the weird and wonderful things are great with homeopathy, because we don't need a diagnosis, we go by the symptoms. So this person is extremely sensitive to the slightest noise now, whatever the cause was. She puts it down to the COVID situation. There was no other change in her life, but yeah, it can respond to the appropriate homeopathic medicine. So going back to the case, worse in the morning and after eating, painful vomiting, chilly, irritable, better lying down and for warmth, and having terrible constipation. So if you think back over the remedies, it's not really that one. It's not really that one. She's not restless. She doesn't have burning pains. It's not really that one. There's no waves of nausea, cold perspiration. She's not saying she's worse with the smell of tobacco smoke. How about this one? Nausea in the morning and after eating. She's got constipation. She's irritable. So there's a good match there. We don't have to have every symptom of the remedy, but what we want to see is that most of the symptoms of the person are in the remedy, are covered by the remedy, and that's a good match, and that's what we're looking for. So moving on to one more. A 32-year-old pregnant woman has constant nausea, and it doesn't seem to be ameliorated by anything. Even after the vomiting, I can't read that there. There's constant nausea, and it doesn't go away. There's a disgust of food and drink, as both aggravate the nausea. Since being pregnant, she's been much more irritable. She says that nothing pleases her. Even those things which normally make her happy don't bring her any satisfaction. So we've got nux moschata. So it's morning sickness with abdominal distension, nausea in the morning when they raise their head off the pillow, and a sensation as if they are about to have diarrhea when they have the nausea. Ipecac, which is a huge, as you can see there, 3-star heavy hitter morning sickness remedy. There's persistent and constant nausea, not relieved by anything, even by vomiting. The mouth can be moist with much saliva. There's this disgust for food and drink. She's usually not thirsty. She can vomit undigested food, bile, even blood. She's worse lying down, and she's quite irritable. Lycopodium, there's nausea and vomiting, swelling of the veins during the first month of pregnancy. And in some cases, the movement of the fetus in the womb becomes annoying and distressing to the mother. So that's quite a unique sort of presentation. It's not really matching our case at all, is it? And iris versicolor, this is also a good remedy. I've just prescribed it the other day for a woman with bad reflux, acid reflux, good remedy for that. There's morning sickness with frequent attacks at short intervals. So all throughout the day, but, regular sort of short bursts of nausea, sour or bitter vomit, profuse ropey saliva, and tenderness over the stomach. Not really our remedy. Lac vaccininum, however you pronounce it, defloratum. This is actually skim milk, so it's a remedy made from skim milk. There's a definitely sickness in the stomach on waking, vertigo and acid reflux on waking. They can't vomit, might want to vomit, but can't vomit, may groan and cry in distress, and have constipation and headaches. Creosotum, which is actually wood tar, so it's sort of burnt tar of a tree. It's extreme salivation with morning sickness. Feels like she's constantly swallowing her saliva, which causes her nausea. She can have nausea and vomiting several hours after eating, feeling of coldness or ice water in the stomach, and a bitter taste after drinking water. So if we go on to our last case, she's got constant nausea, doesn't seem to be ameliorated by anything. Even after vomiting, the nausea does not go away. That's the key mark there. Even after vomiting, the nausea does not go away. She's more irritable and nothing pleases her. So if we go back up, it's not really that. It's not really that. It's not really that. And we get to Ipecac. Persistent and constant nausea, not relieved by anything, even vomiting. And she's irritable. So that, disgust for food and drink, that was a good match and a good remedy in that particular case. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. It's so great to go over those real specifics. Yeah. And do you or you could maybe you could stop sharing the screen if you like now. Could you just go over, Raia, your contact details as well?
Oh, sure. I can be found at the Hormone Clinic, and my phone number is 0429 861086, and my email address is Raia Kousary, RAIA KOUSARY @gmail.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, there's I just thought I'd throw in some other thoughts. For those, if anybody's watching and they're really new to homeopathy, the tinctures come in the form generally as liquids or sprays or little pilules, and generally they just go under your tongue. So that's it, isn't it? It's really simple. You just so that's why it's really easy to use it on children, like babies as well, because just put a couple of drops under their tongue. So very simple to use like that. I thought I'd share with you, those of you who are birth practitioners, this is the homeopathy kit that I used as a midwife, and so that would be in my birthing bag, because I did a lot of primary care labors. So that's meaning at home births and at a birth center, and yeah, and then obviously hospital labors as well. But so that's, and it doesn't matter where you are, these are so good. And just that reminder that we don't need a diagnosis, because it all goes on symptoms, and that is like, it's so different to how Western medicine thinks. And many times people go to the doctor for their general Western medicalized doctor in the community, and they come away with no diagnosis. Right? Yeah. And it's helpful if there is a diagnosis, even from a homeopathic perspective, because you can use homeopathy in conjunction with other things. But so often, isn't it, people come away and go, the doctor didn't really know what it was. Yeah, well, or they think it's this and it's not. And then years later, people have still got these chronic conditions where they have symptoms and no really sound diagnosis. Or, here's the thing. The diagnosis is the symptoms with a Latin name to it. So bronchitis just means itis of the bronchioles, inflammation of the bronchioles, right? So we've got, they've diagnosed bronchitis. No, they've diagnosed inflammation of the bronchioles. It's a Latin word. That's what it means. What's the cause of it? Who knows? Why has it become bacterial? Who knows? Why is your body not fighting it? Who knows? So often you just give a Latin name to something and people go, I was diagnosed with blah, 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 blah. Nah, it's all just the name of the symptom, right?
Yeah.
So often. And
thanks, Kathy, for showing the remedies, because I sort of I probably assumed some knowledge of homeopathy in my presentation. You're right.
I think most people here would have an awareness, but just in case they haven't.
But it is great to have those kits like in the car, in your home, just readily available.
Totally. And I just had my box that I would take with me wherever, when the kids were little, particularly, wherever we were traveling to, that would always be in the car. The last thing I thought I'd throw in there, just again from a mother perspective, is that often when kids have young children have successfully fought off some sort of little infection or whatever, then what you're left with sometimes is this little munchkin who just seems a bit out of sorts. And there is nothing specifically wrong. There is no real symptoms, but you're just your mother's instinct to going in, yeah, you're not quite yourself. And so often as a mum with little ones, you would be talking with other mums with little ones, and they would say, oh yeah, we went to the doctor because I just felt like, little Munchkin wasn't really good, but the doctor said there's nothing wrong. And what you find is that everybody has their constitution. So their constitutional weaknesses, constitutional strengths, which becomes really sort of part of homeopathy. And your constitution can change over years. But what I got to know was what my kids' baseline constitutional remedy was. So when they seemed a little out of sorts, I would give them some of their constitutional remedy, and it would just bring them back to equilibrium, to that homeostatic balance. And because I think without it, the kids would eventually, they do gonna get back to themselves. This helps to just speed it along. But that's very much that little wee tiny child where the mother goes, gosh, you're not yourself today. And then the next day, gee, you're really not yourself. Nothing specific wrong with you, but
just a bit off. Yeah.
You're just a bit off. And
we all get like that some days.
Take them to the doctor, and the doctor goes, can't see anything wrong with your child. And you go home, and then, hey, presto, the next day they're back to their normal self. And you go, what was that?
Yeah.
And so getting to know the little one's constitution is, that's a useful remedy, isn't it?
And that's what we're looking for too, is a change in state. So somebody naturally could be, a fairly irritable person. That's not a symptom because that's how they are. Okay. Yep. But if you've got somebody who's not very irritable at all, they get, they have a health condition come on, say the nausea in pregnancy, and they become very irritable, there's been a big change, then that's a symptom, We're looking at that as a symptom because it's a change from their normal state. Or, a normally confident woman, she's suddenly weepy and clingy and doesn't want to be left alone. That's a symptom. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's a change.
It's that change. Yeah. Very subtle. Yeah. They're basically vibrational tinctures. So often you'll hear modern science kind of go, oh, it's pseudo medicine. Because there's no molecule of the original element that you can see under a microscope.
Which is lucky because we're using arsenic and we're using mercury sometimes.
So exactly.
Who wants to take molecules of that?
No, as you say, and you're not taking molecules of it.
Yeah, and you're not. Yeah.
No, and science can't get their head around yet. They can't get their head around the fact that they can't see a molecule, so why is there anything in there? Because it's a vibrational.
It's working at the quantum level, and if you get deep into quantum physics, which is a big topic, then, but how many people walking around on the street are thoroughly understanding quantum physics? Not many. So
that's absolutely
that's
right.
The problem.
It's a quantum physics level of medicine.
Yeah.
And when we think that when you look at you don't look at it, but when you know the image of an atom, you've got this valence shell around the outside and this huge gap, and then in the middle is is your nucleus, your protons and neutrons, but those are the gap between the electrons around the outside and where those little protons and neutrons are in the nucleus is a massive gap, like in a relation. But what's in that gap? Well, nothing, because there's no molecules, there's no air, there's no nothing, because, well, we can't understand it, and because if it was a molecule, it's way bigger than an atom, right? So what it means is that most of what we're composed of is nothing. Right?
Yeah.
If every molecule gets broken down to atoms, and every atom is this little outside shell of valence shield, and then this big gap of nothing in their little tiny nucleus, well, we're mostly nothing.
Well, we know at a quantum level, you know, the table's not solid. It just appears solid to us, you know, which is
That's
hard to
right.
get your head around. And
Yes.
so you're quite right. Like homeopathy would be likened to, say, acupressure or acupuncture in a bottle. It's a working on the
Yes.
energy body, you know, because we all know when we're going to get sick, you know, there's that sort of day before where you're just feeling, like you say, a bit off, your energy's down. There's sort of, before my period, I used to get sort of what I would describe as trapped energy in my feet, like my feet would get sore. There's kind of like an electricity stuck there or something feeling. And sometimes I'll get that now if I'm going to get a bit unwell. And it's that kind of feeling that, you know, it's your energetic body, your the other parts of you that become sick before the full-on symptoms of actual, you know, mucus and, you know, being unwell.
Yes.
Manifest.
And when you do get that sensation,
Mm.
you know, you go, oh boy, am I coming down with something?
That
Boy,
can
that's a
yeah.
fantastic time to use homeopathy, right? Because you
Yeah.
can completely nip it in the bud.
You nip things in the bud,
Yeah,
yeah,
and it
definitely.
doesn't progress on. Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
it's just been such a joy having you here today, and it's always such a great and fascinating topic, and incredibly effective, especially I would say, you know, the more pure your child's system is, the more rapid and effective the remedies are. You know, when there's a person who's had exposure to a lot of pharmaceutical medicine, it's almost like you sort of got to peel back lots of layers, to like get rid of that, you know, that history and that, but within the system, and then finally you get down to that core constitution. But with those little ones where they've not had exposure to anything like that, oh my God.
You got that immediate pure response to the remedy.
Immediate.
And that's why, you know, it's really good homeopathy with like babies, young children, animals, you know, and that's where you can really see that it's not just placebo effect, because obviously a 6-month-old or a 2-year-old doesn't know anything about a remedy, or a cow having mastitis, you know. You know, farmers use it in New Zealand, homeopathy, for preventing and
you can
treating
see it, you
mastitis.
know, when they're a few months old and they're miserable over something because they've just got their very first little cold, and you give them the correct drop. Now, if you give them the wrong drop, doesn't do anything. Fine. If you give them the correct drop, you'll see that result. And 15 minutes later, you see it. Or another place where I used homeopathy a lot, and definitely, absolutely, reduced the amount of assisted birth deliveries that were required, were women, particularly primates. They're in natural labor. It's gone on a long time. You know, they might have had 2 or 3 nights of latent labor, and then finally it kicked into good, strong, active labor. They've dilated beautifully. It's progressed well. They're at the pushing stage, and they are just getting really tired. And they can get a little bit despondent when they start pushing, thinking that, you know, in 10 minutes they're going to have a baby. And sometimes pushing, it's normal sometimes for pushing to go on for 2 to 3 hours. And so long as that baby is happy and not stressed, and there's descent, and, you know, we're making progress, we keep going. I mean, that's sometimes what it can take.
It's nature.
It's nature. It's just Mother Nature. And I've even had pushing stages sometimes go as long as 4 hours, and I will tell you that was notoriously Pilates instructors and avid horse riders. They just have incredibly strong pelvic floors that are not necessarily helpful at birth. Different topic. But when you've got women who are at that pushing phase, and you can just feel them starting to get despondent, they just expected to push their baby out a little bit quicker. And oh my goodness, using a birth aid mix, and instantly, I would say within, you know, using a birth aid mix for about 15 to 20 minutes, and within 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, they're re-energized, their body's re-energized, the contractions have gone back to being sort of 2 to 3 every 10 minutes instead of 2. They're lasting longer, they're stronger, they've got more energy, and we have a baby.
Brilliant.
And in another situation, that is the type of labor where she emotionally gets a little down, and that dials down her contractions when she does. And they end up with an assisted delivery. You know, von twos, forceps, or in some occasions, if it really goes to custard, epidurals go up and Synto goes up, and suddenly it's ends in a C-section. And those women didn't have to have that if they just had that little boost of energy along with IV fluids. That always helps as well. They're usually dehydrated by then. But look, thank you so much.
No,
And I hope
thank you for having me back. Yeah.
Useful to everybody today, and want to wish everybody a lovely rest of your week. And we'll see you all next week. And thank you, Raia.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Have a lovely week. Bye-bye.